Welcome to Tartarian Tales 10, and it's going to be featuring the art of Piranesi, the master, Giovanni Battista Piranesi, and he is awesome. You're going to see some great art. He did a little take on prisons at one point, and I believe this section of the Voyages and Travels of the Ambassadors book that I read from before in the past is relating to prisons and something crazy. So I haven't read it yet. Figure what better way to read it and record it and share it. So let's see what happens here. Alright, here is chapter 35, and again, warning, I will butcher some of these words, starting with the fourth one. Here we go. The prison of Xinanguebalu, wherein those are kept which have been condemned to serve at the reparations of the wall of Tartaria, in another enclosure called the Treasure of the Dead, with the revenues wherewith this prison is maintained. So here we go. Desisting now from speaking in particular of the great number of the rich and magnificent buildings which we saw in the city of Pekin, I will only insist on some of the edifices thereof that seemed more remarkable to me than the rest, whence it may be easiest to infer what all those might be, whereof I will not make any mention here, to avoid prolixity. And of these neither would I speak, were it not that our Lord may one day permit that the Portugal nation, full of valor and of lofty courage, may make use of this relation for the glory of our great God, to the end that by these humane means, in the assistance of his divine favor, it may make those barbarous people understand the verity of our holy Catholic faith, from which their sins have too far estoined them, as they mock at all that we say to them thereof. Hereunto I will add that they are so extravagant and scentless as they dare boldly affirm that only with beholding the face of the Son of the Sun, which is their King, a soul would be more happy than with all other things of the world, besides which persuades me that if God of his infinite mercy and goodness would grant that the king of this people might become a Christian, it would be an ease matter to convert all his subjects, whereas otherwise I hold it difficult for so much as one to change his belief, and all by reason of the great awe they are in of the law, which they fear and reverence alike, and whereof it is not to be believed how much they cherish the ministers. But to return to my discourse, the first building which I saw of those that were most remarkable was a prison, which they call Xinanguebalu, that is to say, the enclosure of the Epiles. The circuit of this prison is 2 leagues square, or a little less, both in length and breadth. It is enclosed with a very high wall, without any battlements. The wall on the outside is environed with a great deep ditch full of water, over the which are many of drawbridges that are drawn up in the night with certain iron chains, and so hang suspended on huge cast pillars. In this prison is an ark of strong hewed stone, abutting in the towers in the tops, whereof are 6 great sentinel bells, which are never rung, but all the rest within the said enclosure do answer them, which the Chinese affirm to be above 100, and indeed they make a most horrible din. In this place there are ordinarily 300,000 prisoners, between 17 and 50, whereas we were much amazed, and indeed we had good cause. In regard, it is a thing so unusual and extraordinary. Now, desiring to know of the Chinese the occasion of so marvelous a building, and of the great number of prisoners that were in it, they answered us that after the king of China, named Crifuago Docote, had finished a wall of 300 leagues spaced betwixt the kingdom of China and that of Tartaria, as I have declared otherwhere, he ordained by the advice of his people, for to that effect he caused an assembly of his estates to be held, that all those which should be condemned to banishment should be sent to work in the repairing of this wall, and that after they had served 6 years together therein, they might freely depart, though they were sentenced to serve for a longer time, because the king pardoned them the remainder of the term by way of charity and alms. But if during those years they should happen to perform any remarkable act, or other thing, where it appeared they had advantage over others, or if they were 3 times wounded in the sallies they should make, or if they killed some of their enemies, they were then to be dispensed with for all the rest of their time, and that the Cham should grant them a certain should grant them a certificate thereof, where it should be declared why he had delivered them, and how he had thereby satisfied the ordinances of war. 210,000 men are to be continually entertained in the work of the wall by the first institution, whereof defalcation is made of a third part, for such as are dead, maimed, and delivered, either for their notable actions, or for that they had accomplished their time. And likewise, when as the Cham, who is as the chief of all those sent on the Pitaquamai, which is the highest court of justice, to furnish him with that number of men, they could not assemble them together so soon as was necessary, for that they were divided in so many several places of that empire, which is prodigiously great, as I have delivered before, and that withal a long time was required for the assembling them together. Another king named Gopali Apirao, who succeeded to that Krifswago Decote, ordained that the great enclosure should be made in the city of Pekin, to the end that as soon as any were condemned to the work of this wall, they should be carried to Ziningwabalai, for to be there altogether, by which means they might be sent away without any delay, and now is done. So soon as the court of justice hath committed the prisoners to this prison, whereof he that brings them hath a certificate, they are immediately left at liberty, so that they may walk at their pleasure within this great enclosure, having nothing but a little plate of a span long and 4 fingers broad, wherein these words are engraven: Such a one of such a place hath been condemned to the general exile for such a cause. He entered such a day, such a month, such a year. Now the reason why they make every prisoner to carry this plate for a testimony of their evil actions is to manifest for what crime he was condemned and at what time he entered, because everyone goes forth comfortably to the length of time that shall be since he entered in. These prisoners are held for duly delivered when they are drawn out of captivity for to go and work at the wall, for they cannot upon any cause whatsoever be exempted from the prison of Ziningwabaliao, and the time they are there is counted to them for nothing. In regard they have no hope of liberty, but at that instant when their turn permits them to work in the reparations, for then they may be sure to be delivered, according to the ordinance whereof I have made mention before. Having now delivered the occasion wheretofore great a prison was made, before I leave it, I hold it not amiss to speak of a fair which we saw there, of 2 that are usually kept every year, which those of the country call Gongsenem Aparau Xingwagabalu, that is to say, the rich fair of the prison of the condemned. Their fairs are kept in the months of July and January, with very magnificent feasts, solemnized for the invocation of their idols, and even there they have their plenary indulgences, by means thereof great riches of gold and silver are promised them in other world. They are both of them frank and free, so as to the merchants pay no duties, which is the cause that they flock thither in such great number, as they assured us that there were 3 millions of persons there, and for as much as I said before, that the 300,000 that are imprisoned there are at liberty, as well as those that go in and out. You shall see what courts they hold to keep the prisoners from getting forth amongst others. Every one that is free and comes in hath a mark set on the wrist or of his right arm, with a certain confection made of oil, bitumen, lacquer, rhubarb, and alumum, which, being once dry, cannot be any ways defaced, but by the means of vinegar and salt mingled together, very hot. And to the end that so great a number of people may be marked, on both sides of the gates stand a many of Shampautions, who with stamps of lead dipped in this bitumen imprints a mark on everyone that presents himself unto them, and so they let him enter, which is only practiced on men, not upon women, because none of that sex are ever condemned to the labor of the wall. When therefore they come to go out of the gates, they must all have their arms bared where their mark is, that the said Chainpantowans, who are the porters and ministers of this affair, may know them, and let them pass in, if by chance any one be so unhappy as to have that mark defaced by any accident. He must even have patience, and remain with the other prisoners. In regard, there is no way to get him out of this place, if he be found without that mark. Now those Shainpotoans are so dexterous and well varied in it that 100,000 men may in an hour go in and out without trouble, so that by this means the 300,000 prisoners continue in their captivity, and none of them can flip away amongst others to get out. There are in this prison 3 great enclosures like great towns, where there are a number of houses and very long streets without any lanes, and at the entrance into each street there are good gates, with their sentinel bells aloft, together with a shumbin and 20 men for a guard. Within a flight chute of those enclosures are the lodgings of the Cham, who commands all this prison, and those lodgings are composed of a number of fair houses, wherein are many outcourts, gardens, ponds, halls, and chambers, enriched with excellent inventions, able to lodge a king at his ease. How great a court fever he have! In the true principal of these towns there are 2 streets, each of them about a flight chute long, which abut upon the Cham's lodgings, arched all along with stone, and covered overhead like the hospital at Lisbon, but that they far surpass it. Here are all things to be sold that one can desire, as well for victual and other kind of provisions, as for all sorts of merchandise and rich wares. In those arched streets, which are many very spacious and long, are there 2 fairs kept every year, whither such a multitude of people resort, as I have declared before. Moreover, within the enclosure of the prison are divers woods of tall and high trees, with many small streams and ponds of clear sweet water for the use of the prisoners and to wash their linens, as also sundry hermitages and hospitals, together with 12 very sumptuous and rich monasteries, so that whatsoever is to be had in great town may in great abundance be found within the enclosure, and with advantage in many things, because the most part of these prisoners have their wives and children there, to whom the king gives a lodging answerable to the household or family which each one hath. The second of those things which I have undertaken to relate is another enclosure we saw, almost as big as the former, compassed about with strong walls and great ditches. This place is called Muksiparan, which signifies the treasure of the dead, where are many towers of hewed carved stone, and steeples diversely painted. The walls on the top are instead of battlements environed with iron gates, where there are a number of idols of different figures, as of men, serpents, horses, oxen, elephants, fishes, adders, and many other monstrous forms of creatures, which were never seen, some of brass and iron, and others of tin and copper, so that this infinite company of several figures joined together is one of the most remarkable and pleasantest things that can be imagined. Having passed over the bridge of the ditch, we arrived at a great court that was at the first entrance, enclosed round about with huge gates, and paved all over with white and black stones in checker-work, so polished and bright as one might see himself in them as in a looking-glass. In the midst of this court was a pillar of jasper, 6 and 30 spans high, and as it seemed all of one piece, on the top whereof was an idol of silver in the figure of a woman, which with her hands strangled a serpent, that was excellently ensmelled with black and green. A little further at the entrance of another gate, which stood between 2 very high towers, and accompanied with 24 pillars of huge great stone, there were 2 figures of men, each of them with an iron club in his hand, as if they had served to guard that passage, being 140 spans high, with such hideous and ugly visages as make them even to tremble that behold them. The Chinese called them Ziksipatan Zalikan, that is to say, the blowers of the house of smoke. At the entering into this gate there were 12 men with halberds and 2 registers set at a table, who enrolled all that entered there, unto whom every one paid a matter of a groat. When we were entered within this gate, we met with a very large street, closed on both sides with goodly arches, as well in regard of the workmanship as the rest, round about the which hung an infinite company of little bells of Latin by canes of the same metal, that moved by the air, made such a noise as one could not without much ado hear one another. The street might be about half a league long, and within these arches on both sides of the way were 2 rows of low houses, like unto great churches, with steeples gilt, and divers inventions of painting. Of these houses the Chinese assured us there was in that place 3,000, all which from the very top to the bottom were full of dead men's skulls, a thing so strange that in every man's judgment 1,000 great shops could hardly contain them. Behind these houses, both on the one side and the other, were 2 great mounts of dead men's bones, reaching far above the ridges of the houses, full as long as the street, and of a mighty breadth. These bones were ordered and disposed one upon another so curiously and aptly that they seemed to grow there. Having demanded of the Chineses whether any register was kept of these bones, they answered, there was for the Talagrepos, unto whose charge the administration of these 3,000 houses was committed, and rolled them all, and that none of the houses yielded less than 2,000 taxes revenue out of such lands, as the owners of these bones had bequeathed us them for their souls' health, and that the rent of these 3,000 houses together amounted unto 5 millions of gold yearly, whereof the king had 4, and the Telegrapas the other 4, to defray the expenses of this fabric, and that the 4 appertained to the king as their support, who dispensed them in the maintenance of the 300,000 prisoners of Sineng Guabalao. Being amazed at this marvel, I've begun to go along this street, in the midst whereof we've found a great piazza, encompassed about with 2 huge grates of latten, and within it was an adder of brass, and folded into I know not how many bouts, and so big that it contained 30 fathom in circuit. Being withal so ugly and dreadful as no words are able to describe it, some of us would eliminate the weight of it, and the least opinions reached of 1,000 quintals, were it hollow within, as I believe it was. Now, although it was of an unmeasurable greatness, yet was it in every part so well proportioned as nothing could be amended, whereunto also the workmanship thereof is so correspondent, that all the perfection that can be desired from a great workman is observed in it. This monstrous serpent, which the Chinese call the gluttonous serpent of the house of smoke, had on the top of his head a bowl of iron, 250 foot in circumference, as if it had been thrown at him from some other place. 20 paces further was the figure of a man of the same brass, in the form of a giant, in like manner very strange and extraordinary, as well for the greatness of the body as the hugeness of the limbs. This monster held an iron bowl just as big as the other aloft in both his hands, and beholding the serpent with a frowning and angry countenance, he seemed as though he would throw his bowl at him. Round about this figure was a number of little idols, all gilt on their knees, with their hands lifted up to him, as if they would adore him. All this great edifice was consecrated to the honor of this idol, called Muklaparan, whom the Chinese affirm to be the treasurer of all the dead bones, and that when the gluttonous serpent before mentioned came to steal them away, he made at him with the bowl which he held in his hands, whereupon the serpent in great fear fled immediately away to the bottom of the profound house of smoke. Whether God had precipitated him for his great wickedness, and further that he had maintained a combat with him 3,000 years already, and was to continue the same 3,000 years more, so that from 3,000 to 3,000 years he was to employ 5 bowls, wherewith he was to make an end of killing him. Hereunto they added that as soon as this serpent should be dead, the bones that were there assembled would return to their bodies, to which they appertained formerly, and so should go and remain forever in the house of the moon. To these brutish opinions they joy in many others such like, unto which they give so much faith that nothing can be able to remove them from it, for it is the doctrine that is preached unto them by their bonzos, who also tell them that the true way to make a soul happy is to gather these bones together into this place, by means whereof there is not a day passes but that 1,000 or 2 of these wretched bones are brought thither. Now if some for their far distance cannot bring all the bones whole thither, they will at least bring a tooth or 2, and so they say that by the way of an alms they make as good satisfaction as if they brought all the rest, which is the reason that in all these charnel houses there is such an infinite multitude of these teeth, that one might laden many ships with it. We saw in a great plain without the walls of this city another building, very sumptuous and rich, which they call Nakapirao, that is to say, the Queen of Heaven. For it is the opinion of these blinded wretches that our Lord above is married like the kings here below, and that the children which he hath had by the Nakapirao are the stars we see twinkling in the firmament by night, and that when any exhalation comes to dissolve in the air, they say that it is one of the children that is dead, whereas his other brothers are so grieved that they shed such abundance of tears as the earth is watered therewith, by which means God provides us of our living, as it were in a manner of alms bestowed for the souls of the deceased. But letting pass these and other such like fooleries, I will only treat of such particulars as we observed in this great edifice, whereof the first was 140 convents of this accursed religion, both of men and women, in each of which there are 400 persons, amounting in all to 56,000, besides an infinite number of religious servants that are not obliged to their vow of protection that are within, who for a mark of their priestly dignity are clothed in violet, with green stars on them, having their head, beard, and eyebrows shaven, and wearing beads about their necks to pray with, but for all that they crave no alms, by reason they have revenue enough to live on. The next was an enclosure within this huge building, a league in circuit, the walls whereof were built upon arches, vaults of strong hewed stone, and underneath them were galleries, environed all about with balusters of Latin. Within an enclosure, at a gate through which we passed, we saw under most deformed figures the two porters of hell, at least they believe so, calling the one Baccharon and the other Quagasau, both of them with iron clubs in their hands, and so hideous and horrible to see to, that it is impossible to behold them without fear. Having passed this gate under a chain that went across from the breast of one of these devils to the other, we entered into a very fair street, both for breadth and length, enclosed at either end with many arches, diversely painted on the top whereof were all along 2 rows of idols to the number of 5,000. Now we could not well judge of what matter these idols were made. Howsoever, they were gilt all over, and upon their heads they wore mitres of sundry inventions. At the end of this street was a great square place, paved with black and white stone, encompassed about with 4 rows of giants in brass, each of them 15 foot high, with halberds in their hands, and their hair and beards all gilt, which was not only a very pleasing object to the eye, but also represented a kind of majestical greatness. At the end of this place was Kuye Huan, the god of rain, which idol was so huge that with his head he touched the battlements of the tower, being above 12 fathom high. He was likewise of brass, and both from his mouth, head, and breast at 26 several places came out streams of water. Having passed between his legs, which stood straddling at a great distance one from another, we entered into a large room, as long as a church, where there were 3 ships set upon very big and high pillars of jasper. All along the walls thereof, on both sides, were many of idols, great and little in diverse forms, all gilt, fitted, and disposed in such order as they took up all the breadth and length of the walls, and seemed at first sight to be all gold. At the end of this room or temple, upon a round tribunal, whereunto one ascended by 15 winding stairs, was an altar, proportionable to the same tribunal, whereon stood the image of Nakapirau, in the likeness of a very fair woman, with her hair hanging up on her shoulders, and her hands lifted up to heaven. Now for that she was gilt all over with fine gold, and that with a great deal of art and care, she glistened in that manner as it was impossible to continue looking on her, so dazed were a man's eyes with the rays that darted from her. Round about this tribunal on the first 4 stairs were the statues of 12 kings of China in silver, with crowns on their heads and maces on their shoulders. A little lower were 3 rows of idols, gilt, kneeling on their knees and holding up their hands, and all about hung a number of silver candlesticks with 7 branches apiece. When we were out of this, we went through another street, all arched like that by which we entered in, and from this we passed through 2 other streets, full of very stately buildings, and so came to a gate that stood between 4 high towers, where there was a chisao with 30 idol or halberders and 2 registers, which wrote down the names of all that went in and out, as they did ours, and so we gave them about a groat for our passage out. Wow, what a ridiculous story that is. The fact that you can clearly see this prison or something, there was something here that was crafted by master, and a race of master artists and craftsmen beyond compare. There was also a very diverse iconography, it seemed like, with thousands of different idols all over the place. These, like, what was going on here? What were these people thinking? How could they have done such ridiculously magnificent buildings, and who did they inherit it from? How old were the stuff that these Christian writers considered heathen? How old were those thoughts and stories that they were relaying to these guys? And, like, where did all these jewels go? Where did these statues go? Where are these things, these giants that they speak about? They're clearly, most likely made by giants or something. Like, it doesn't even, some of the stuff that they describe doesn't, and that we see in these remaining pictures that of old world Tartaria or whatever these ancient cultures were that were erased. These things just seem beyond compare. They seem impossible for us to build now, and especially the fact that they've stood. And to just think that they're just these shells is definitely preposterous, because these things were definitely laden and filled in with different, I can't even imagine the painting and decorations that occurred on them, the gold that must have been everywhere. And this clip in this book this chapter had some great descriptions of that, which really just blew my mind and fed the imagination. So I hope that did it as well for you all out there. Hope you enjoyed the art of Piranesi and Tartarian Tales number 10. I will hopefully do more. I will probably pick through this book, because this book is blowing my mind. I mean, that thing with the serpents and the woman, like, it's definitely clear symbols in that past reading that we adopted in this new, the people who took over and are in control adopted. So what is going on? I have no idea. Let's keep reading. Bless you all.